let's now talk about new rhetoric, which obviously is not entirely different from the classical rhetoric, but it somehow deviates from classical rhetoric in terms that people have been changing their views about the importance of rhetoric in serious argumentation. Some people have been believing that rhetoric may be a useful strategy to enhance an argument, and some probably would argue against it. In this regard, we have a very renowned name, philosopher Petrus Ramus, who argued in 16th century that rhetoric should be restricted to a theory of stylistic techniques, and which later on found many followers, that we should see rhetoric as some kind of grammatical or stylistic technique, as the production of a better use of style, and this how it should be taught and developed. Later on, Descartes' verdict against all kinds of probable reasoning also deprived rhetorical argumentation theories of their status as a serious discipline. So, as Descartes spoke against probable reasoning, and he was in favor of more concrete reasoning. Therefore, as in rhetoric, we talk about a lot of probable things. So rhetoric somehow, because of this, was deprived from its status as a very serious and important academic discipline. And thus, rhetoric was gradually reduced to a theory of style. It turned down to be a theory of style only. The most important revival of rhetoric later on was developed by Belgian philosopher Jem Peltman, somehow in early part of the 20th century, and the Belgian sociologist Lucy in their famous trait de argumentation. Perlman, with his companions, tried to show that outside the disciplines such as formal logic and mathematics, we have the fields, for example, political science and religious argumentation, and there is more room for proofs which can be acceptable in a way which is different from formal logic or mathematical logic. They claim that arguments in such disciplines are directed towards an audience. Therefore, audience reaction, audience response should be given a prime importance in order to judge the value or worth of such arguments. However, in spite of this dominant role of audience in new rhetoric clearly deviates from an overemphasis or relativism of a particular audience. Rather, new rhetoric looks for a universal audience, an audience which they can appeal commonsensically. It's very difficult to define universal audience which new rhetoric is looking for. However, roughly speaking, we can call a universal audience a kind of totality of all normal adult human beings. That means, in simple words, something which appeals to the common sense of every thinking human being, that can be considered as a good rhetoric in the domain of new rhetoric. New rhetoric's most attractive contribution has been so far to develop an argumentation typology of argumentative schemes. As I said earlier, this is not altogether different from traditional or Aristotelian logic. Rather, it can be seen as a revival of Aristotelian rhetoric and dialect, with approximately 30 argument schemes corresponding to most of the Aristotelian topics. On the other hand, empirically interesting new types of argument have also been integrated here, but most of them rely on Aristotelian logic. The weakness of this typology, however, have been shown by many people writing later on about this. For example, we can see that Perlman and Titicaca's argumentation do not establish a general model of argumentation, and they do not represent the argument schemes explicitly. More importantly, nor do they sufficiently discuss the problems of the delimitation of their schemes. So this field still, new rhetoric still needs a lot to be done, and maybe in future some people would probably develop a more comprehensive theory of argumentation and rhetoric, and this field of new rhetoric would establish further.